All right, I can hardly believe how very different our fields of work and expertise are, but I promised the co-chair of the seventh session that there'll be no spoilers, but I just have to tell you one thing. If you just look at the affiliations of our panel speakers, you'll see a proof of how many perspectives we account for examining the issues we tackle, and all that we've done in just 2 days. Ladies and gentlemen, it would be impossible anywhere else, but of course not at the University of Warsaw that hosts our conference. Not a chance. And that, I'm afraid, was a spoiler. So, ladies and gentlemen, the European Research Area Potential in the Social Sciences and Humanities and its co-chair, Sara Perry.
What was it? There we go. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Interestingly, I think we're going to extend and add to a lot of the themes that were broached in the previous session, especially around supporting interdisciplinary, collaborative research, and indeed more than that, transdisciplinary research. So welcome. My name is Sara Perry. I am an archaeologist and an associate professor at University College London, or UCL. I'm also in the very privileged position of being able to introduce you to session 7 and to co-chair it with the fantastic Max Bielecki, who sits beside me here. Just to position myself within the topics of this conference, I was born in Canada. I'm now a citizen of the UK, and I've lived as an archaeologist with a specialty around digital transformations, which will become important as we go on. I've lived as an archaeologist for extended periods across Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Canada. And more than this, I've worked in industry, charity, government, and private research, as well as academia. So I have navigated most of my working life between very different types of professional environments with different beneficiaries, different values, and different goals. So I am currently the lead of a cross-European project called Transforming Data Reuse in Archaeology, funded through collaboration of the humanities and social sciences in Europe. And as you just heard, the acronym for this is CHANCE, and I will carry on from now calling it CHANCE. CHANCE is a joint initiative of 27 research funding organizations from 24 countries supporting research in the social sciences and humanities. And it's through CHANCE that I have met all of the presenters in today's session, as I'm also the lead of the Knowledge Exchange program that's related to CHANCE that links more than 600 team members that are working on CHANCE projects. So those who will be speaking to you today lead or partner on CHANCE projects or support aspects of CHANCE and its future iterations through the European Commission and its affiliate countries. So what are we going to do here for the next hour and a half? We want to consider some of the insights from our collaborative work on CHANCE projects, especially thinking through how lived experiences and values, including European values, equality, dignity, freedom, justice, etc., may sit in tension with one another and with rampant digital infrastructure development. As I think I've suggested, critical to CHANCE is a focus on knowledge exchange between the wide ecosystem of actors implicated in European digital transformations. For example, businesses, trade unions, academics, regulators, public services, etc. These actors may operate at variance with one another, for example, local versus national government, and their actions may also be inherently contradictory, for instance, relying on proprietary platforms to disseminate crucial information related to public good. The consequences here can obviously be severe. So through the lens of 2 CHANCE projects, the first called Public Service Media in the Age of Platforms, or PSMAP, and the second, Time Experience in Europe's Digital Age, or TIMED. The panelists are going to reflect on the lived experiences of individuals whose work and home conditions are governed by algorithmic systems and platform economies and other digital interventions, and also consider the sometimes contradictory roles of different regulators, businesses, and other stakeholders in navigating the digital landscape. Most importantly, though, all of the panelists will reflect on their experiences in recruiting, coordinating, championing, negotiating, moderating, enabling engagement of varied and sometimes potentially clashing stakeholders in their own project work and in wider research and innovation activities. So we have 4 speakers representing different positionalities from academia, industry, government, and beyond. These speakers are Catherine Johnson of the PSMAP project, Ruth Ogden and Anna Řidká of the Timed project, and Frank Siebern-Thomas representing the European Commission's Digi Employment Unit. Now, I'm going to provide much more elaborate introductions of each speaker in a moment, including their full affiliations, just so you know. But I wanted to mention that our planned 5th speaker, Sasha Scott from the European Broadcasting Union, who works a lot alongside Catherine on PSMAP, had to send his last-minute apologies. I think Catherine is going to say a bit more about Sasha and other partnerships on that project shortly. First, I'm lucky to be joined by my co-moderator, Maksymilian Bielecki, assistant professor at SWPS University in Poland and a psychologist specializing in neurocognitive science, psychophysiology, psychometrics, and psychological research methodology. Max has a very diverse and fascinating background working across academia and industry. He's a co-founder of the Open Workshop of Artificial Intelligence and co-founder of the Human Tech Center for Social and Technological Innovations at SWPS. At the center, he focuses on the application of psychology in the development of new products, processes, and services. Following the speakers' presentations, Max is going to guide everyone through a discussion, and he will also help me to ensure that all of your questions are answered. And in order to do that, to pepper your topics of interest into those that we've already defined with our panelists, we have created a QR code to enable you to pose questions, ideas, or comments. So at any time over the course of this session, please scan the code. Tell us if you have a particular person you want to address, and then share your thoughts. And once you submit your question, you'll see that you have the option to submit again. So one scan of the QR code now will allow you to share your questions throughout the session. But there's also some QR codes on the following slides, so you won't have missed your opportunity after I change this slide. I'm going to then layer your questions into the conversation between Max and the panelists. And then we're going to conclude with Frank telling us a bit more about a forthcoming research and innovation initiative, which has resonance with some of the aims and the design of Chance, but goes much further. So by the end of this session, I hope you'll have learned a little bit about the phenomenal inter- and transdisciplinary research and practice that underlies the Timed and PSMAP projects and their relation to the future of digital transformations and collaboration in Europe. I hope that you'll have had an opportunity to reflect on the joys and the challenges, the opportunities and the gaps that exist when we call upon different sectors, actors, and specialities to collaborate. I hope you'll feel that you have had an opportunity to ask questions of the panelists and know that you're welcome to follow up with all of us after the session. And I hope that you will leave feeling inspired about the new initiatives that are on the horizon for collaborative work in the social sciences and humanities, as well as feeling informed about the European Commission perspective on pursuing meaningful and impactful collaboration now and in the future. So without any more pause, I am going to introduce you to our first speaker, Catherine. Catherine is Professor of Media and Communication at the University of Leeds in the UK. She's an expert in the screen media industries and currently leads the Public Service Media in the Age of Platforms PSMAP project. She's author of 4 monographs, including Online TV from 2019 and Branding TV from 2012. She regularly works in collaboration with industry, regulators, and policymakers, and she's currently a member of the College of Experts at the UK government's Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and chairs the Audiences Working Group for the DCMS's Future of TV Distribution Stakeholder Forum. So I invite you to the platform now. Thank you so much. Sure.
Now it is. Oh, yes, now you can hear me. Thank you so much for that introduction, Sarah, and for the opportunity to talk to you today about the Public Service Media in the Age of Platforms project. I'm going the wrong way. There we go. So the context for the project is that public service media has been absolutely central to European culture, society, and democracy for almost 100 years. But today, public service media is operating in a vastly different context. When we talk about this context in our project as the age of platforms, we're broadly thinking about two simultaneous processes that are happening. So the first is that public service media organizations are having to compete with largely global or transnational actors like subscription video on demand services, streaming services like YouTube, for both revenue, for production and talent, and for audiences. At the same time, they are now having to deliver their radio and television services, and we focus on television and screen media, through infrastructures that are owned by those global platforms. So there's this sort of dual focus. And within that context, our project asks how public service media organizations, but also regulators and policymakers are adapting to this platform age and what that means to the values underpinning public service media. We look at 6 countries. We principally focus on the European countries represented here on the map and the public service broadcasters within those. We do some of the comparative research with Canada as a sort of non-European test case. And I'm happy to say more about how we selected those countries in questions. I wanted to say a little bit about how we built stakeholder collaboration into the project. And unfortunately, Sasha Scott from the European Broadcasting Union, who's one of our project partners, can't be here today because he is unwell. But stakeholder collaboration is absolutely essential to the design of the project. So we have the European Broadcasting Union, which is an organization that brings together, I have it written down here somewhere, I think it's 115 organizations from 56 different countries as one of our project partners, and also the European Platform of Regulatory Authorities, EPRA, which does the same but for media regulators as opposed to broadcasters. And they're project partners. They sit on our advisory board and we work closely with them throughout that process. We discussed with them early on in the design of the project when we were developing the bid, and also with other key stakeholders like public service broadcasters and regulators in our case study countries. And that helped to design the research questions and the project itself. As part of the project design, we have 3 touch points, one every year, where we bring academics into dialogue with other stakeholders. So we had a knowledge exchange workshop at the end of year 1 in Brussels, one in Warsaw at the end of year 2, and we have a final project conference in September. And all of those are not focused on academics speaking to stakeholders. It is absolutely about providing equal space for those different kinds of stakeholders to come together, and that includes public service broadcasters, regulators, policymakers, and third sector organizations. Also built into the design of the project is outputs that are not just academic. So as well as producing academic outputs, we produce a series of policy briefs. They look like this, and I've got some copies if you want to see an example. These are written specifically for stakeholders in clear, non-academic language. They're 4 pages, and they include sets of recommendations and links to the project. And we're producing a longer final project report that we'll launch at our conference, again, focused specifically at our stakeholders. I'll hold off on saying a little bit more about other stakeholder engagement because I'm going to talk about that right at the very end. So in terms of the project and what we found in the project, it's very hard to summarize in a couple of minutes, 2.5 years worth of work. And the challenges that are being faced are very contextual and they play out differently in different countries. But we've broadly coalesced it down to sort of 4 key challenges that all of the public service broadcasters in our case study countries are facing, although in different ways. So the first is audience reach. It's much harder to reach all audiences, particularly but not exclusively younger viewers, and that's a challenge faced across the board. The second and linked to that is brand awareness. So as it becomes harder to reach all audiences, the public service media brand awareness is just declining. So people don't even know necessarily what are public service media organizations in their countries. And in some cases, the value of those public service media brands is also declining. Sustainability, again, a challenge across the board. There are declining revenues. They're both in terms of public funding, but also in terms of commercial funding, because there's less money to be made on linear broadcast advertising as audiences move away. And you can't generate the same level of revenue on online advertising because there's too many intermediaries in the value chain. But at the same time, there are increased costs. So the costs of production have gone up because of the entry of new subscription video on demand players with lots of money into that sector. And the public service broadcasters are now having to run 2 sets of distribution. They're having to distribute on demand, on their video on demand services, and on linear. And they're having to innovate new forms of linear, like algorithmic personalization and so on. So all of this is adding to their costs. And some of them are exploring new distribution strategies around using social media and video sharing platforms, but that is extremely challenging, and I'm happy to talk about that more in questions. The final challenge, I think, is quite a common one for organizations that have been around for quite a long time and are having to adapt to change, which is what we call organizational path dependency, which basically means you've been a broadcast organization or a particular kind of organization for a long time. How do you shift your culture to being a very different kind of organization? And that is a challenge we see across the board. And these challenges are impacting the values underpinning public service media. And we've identified 6 core values that are being challenged in this context. So the first, I mentioned the difficulties of reaching all audiences. This means that the underpinning value of universality, that everybody should have access to public service media and should be using it, that is becoming increasingly open to challenge. Public service broadcasters in many countries were the providers of high quality media content in their countries. And now increasingly subscription video on demand services are replacing that in certain genres. So there's a need to redefine what quality means. In terms of diversity, the rise of platforms and of personalization offers all sorts of opportunities for public service broadcasters to meet the needs of diverse audiences. But our research shows that they are so driven by just trying to get people to their online services that they are focusing on mass content that brings large audiences in at the expense of providing a diverse range of genres and content for diverse audiences. The public service broadcasters we spoke to talked about the important role they play in challenging mis and disinformation, but this is a real challenge in contexts where there isn't sufficient independence from government or political interference, and it's really hard if public service broadcasters aren't on social media. Accountability has become more important because trust has become more important to the legitimacy of public service media. And with the decline in brand values, there's the decline in trust. And accountability is more challenging when public service media organizations start to use big data, use algorithms, and there's often a lack of algorithmic and data transparency. And finally, we heard that from the public service broadcasters themselves that innovation is the key driving value for them, but that is inhibited by their remits and their finances and lack of money. So I wanted to end briefly by saying a little bit about some of the knowledge exchange work that we've done. We have a massive spreadsheet on this, and I could have picked about 8 or 9 different examples, but I've just tried to pull out a few. The first 2 are unintended. We didn't know that they were not built into the project. So in the UK context, a piece of media regulation, the first for 20 years, was passed last year. We didn't know that was going to be passed. And the media regulator now has to implement that. that. And they came to us and said, we think there's learnings from your project. We would really like you to set up and run a workshop for our staff to help us to understand how to implement the Act. And so we devised the workshop and ran it for them to help them with that. There's been a set of work happening in the Nordic context where public service broadcasters and regulators are trying to understand how to adapt to the rise of platforms. So we've been invited to present our research at a workshop on state aid regulations with Nordic PSBs in the EBU, to present the staff to senior staff at the Danish PSB DR, to provide written contributions to the Danish Parliament that has this kind of written initiative on the status of Danish democracy, and to present the findings to the Radio and Television Council at the Culture of Ministry in Denmark. And finally, because Sasha's not here and he can't talk about the EBU, I wanted to say a little bit about how we've worked with the EBU. So we have presented the project to the EBU Legal and Policy Assembly, and we've had participation of EBU representatives, not only people like Sasha who work at the EBU, but the countries and public service broadcasters that they represent at or our K workshops, which has enabled us to extend the benefits of the research beyond our case study countries. And at this very moment, one of our project partners is presenting findings about the organisational change part of the research we've done to the EBU Media Summit. So those are just a few examples of how we've been working with stakeholders on the project. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Just a reminder that if you have questions for Catherine or anyone, please feel free to scan the QR code and then we can interweave them into the discussion, the preset discussion questions that we will have in a moment. So I am looking forward now to introducing you to Ruth Ogden, who's Professor of the Psychology of Time at Liverpool John Moores University in the UK, and also the lead of Timed, Time Experience in Europe's Digital Age. Her research focuses on how humans perceive the passage of time. Ruth has collaborated across industry and policymaking, including partnering with the European Space Agency and the Argentinian Antarctic Institute to explore how extreme isolation and confinement affect our experience of time. She's also the co-investigator on the After the End project, which asks questions such as when is a global outbreak or crisis over, and how do such declarations of the end shape our use of resources, our ethics, and our ongoing care. So thank you so much, Ruth. I'll pass this over to you now.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for coming today. Oh, this was supposed to be animated and it's not animated, never mind. The rationale behind Timed is that digital technologies are often sold to us as a way of saving time. So they're marketed as a way of being efficient. You should have more time because you don't have to always go to the grocery store. You can ask Deliveroo to bring your food for you. You don't have to write letters to people. You can email them. You don't even have to call people, WhatsApp. You can just message them instead. Through some of our research, I learned that you can even have a bath tap that you can switch on from your phone, so you don't need to walk upstairs, saving valuable seconds in our busy lives. So there's all sorts of ways in which, in theory, digital technology should be saving us time. And in my head, we should all be like the gentleman in the middle, just sat there with oodles of time on our hands, nothing to do with it. The reality, as I'm sure you're all aware from your own lived experience, is quite the opposite. So digital technology is proliferating activity within our lives. It's blurring the boundaries between work and home. And it's desynchronizing our activities with one another, both within our families, but also within our broader societies. So if you no longer go to work because you work at home, you're not meeting people on your commute, you're not having your lunch with other people in the same way that you would have done in the past. So we have these different sorts of factors that are affecting the way in which we use and experience time as a result of digital proliferation. So the Time Project is based in 6 different countries: the UK, Czech Republic, Poland, Switzerland, Germany and Spain. And we're a very multidisciplinary team. So psychologists, philosophers, sociologists, computer scientists, clinical psychologists, and maybe others that I'm failing to remember. And what we set out to do in our project was to really try and understand, how is this digital revolution affecting the way in which you use your time, and how are those changes making you feel? Are they improving your well-being, or are they reducing your well-being? So we've asked critical questions about what it means to have free time in a digital age, and who are the types of people who are winning in this digital revolution in terms of time. So who are the time rich and who are the time poor? And what can we do to mitigate or to understand some of the implications for our right to time and our right to access free personal time during the digital revolution? We've done a phenomenal amount of data collection. We've collected data from 16,000 people, interviewed 550 people. We've done lab studies. We've created online apps to collect real-time behaviour. These are all open access. So if you're interested in ESM, get in touch and we can give you the code. And critically, we've also developed new measures of digital experience and digital immersion to try and capture both positive and negative accounts of how people live their digital time. What we've found is, in some ways it's quite surprising. Obviously, the Chance programme was set up to explore comparative experiences across Europe, and we anticipated that there would be some more profound differences in the way in which people used and experienced digital technology. We didn't actually find that to be the case. Our research shows that, broadly speaking, across Europe in the countries that we've studied and across genders, people use and experience digital technology very, very similarly. And we can suspect that this is because of the dominant nature of certain platforms and certain apps which permeate across country boundaries. Rather than giving us more time, though, technology is making life incredibly dense for the population of Europe. So we are completely intolerant of doing nothing at a population level. We seem to feel the need to fill every single second of our time with some form of digital act. And this is not to be confused with being productive. People aren't trying to be productive. They just don't want to waste time. So, they go to the toilet with their phone because those precious seconds of sitting there doing nothing, they can't be wasted. They must be spent observing things that are going on in the world. But the problem is that we regret this. We regret it because we see this time as inauthentic or unintellectual. It's shallow. It's not quite meeting our core needs for intellectual stimulation and for connection. The other issue that we face when we think about time with digital technology is that the nature of the way in which algorithms are created means that people are encouraged to spend as long as possible on a particular device or a particular platform. So the key indicator of success for any digital device is how long someone spends on it. And your platform or your device is more successful, according to the industry, if you've spent longer on it. Algorithms are therefore designed to make us lose track of time. And as a result, we end up spending far more time on digital technology than we ever imagine we will. So we'll start off by saying, I'll spend 10 minutes scrolling, insert name of platform, and then 40 minutes later, we're still there. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that means we've lost 30 minutes of time. We're even more time pressured than we ever were before. So it seems that the population of Europe that we've studied, they want a balance. They want some sort of way to have more conscious control over their digital technology use. But they also want higher quality digital content. They want the digital content that's meeting their intellectual and social needs, and not the content that is just good enough to keep them scrolling. So there's work to be done both from providers and from policymakers in that sense about how we try and meet our users' needs more effectively. It's difficult to conclude, to explain all of our conclusions, but I think the key themes that have struck me in this project are that there's a huge disparity between what people want from their time on digital technology and their time in general and what they get. So content is not truly satiating. And social norms are telling people that digital technology use is bad. So a lot of the work that we've done with our participants is exploring why they feel guilty about the time they spend on social media, why they feel regret about it. It turns out that it's not what they're seeing that's the problem. It's that they feel like they're doing something that society tells them is bad. So we need to do work as academics, both in terms of public communication, but also in terms of policy, to think about how we can better communicate the known science around the risks and harms of digital technology. Lots of the things that people worry about, dopamine hits, popcorn brain, there's no evidence for these things, yet they are creating feelings of negative well-being at a population level. The other issue that we found is that increasing digital immersion is creating an erosion of our right to time. So work and home are no longer spatially segregated for many people, but they're also no longer temporally segregated for many people. So we have evidence that people find this both difficult to manage and that they also feel like it is impacting on their health and well-being. So we believe that this perhaps indicates that we need to think much more carefully about how we can protect people's right to time. So acts like the right to disconnect are well-intentioned, but they don't get at the core issue that we live in societies in which working excessively is rewarded. And until we tackle the base level of reward that's associated with overworking, we're not going to be able to demark our time in an effective manner. So what we need, obviously, is policy-led interventions to preserve people's access to time, both in terms of time off digital technology, but also time away from work. We need algorithms that aren't designed to prolong use, and we need algorithms that provide people with high-quality content. At a social level, we need a real discussion about the fact that it is okay to do nothing. We don't have to fill our time consciously. And this may require really significant change in the way that we educate our children and the way in which we value individuals within the broader society. We also need a non-sensationalist public information campaign which details what digital addiction actually means and what neurological alterations actually are evidenced by the use of digital technology, because it is only through clear public communication that the public can make sensible and informed choices about the way in which they use their time. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Ruth. That was great. A reminder to those who've just joined the room that if you have questions for any of the speakers, please feel free to scan the QR code and enter any thoughts, constructive points, etc. So I am really keen now to be able to introduce you to one of the partners on Timed, Anna. Anna Řidká is a labor lawyer working as a collective bargaining specialist for the largest Czech civil service trade union, the Trade Union of State Bodies and Institutions, or OSSOO. She's also a standing member of the Legislative Council at the level of the Czech Moravian Confederation of Trade Unions. In relation to digitalization and automation, she ensures that the interests of employees in state and public administration are represented, be that in her role as one of the sectoral level negotiators of the higher level collective agreement for the Czech civil service, or as secretary of the OSSOO Digitalization Working Group. Thank you so much, Anna.
Of course. Thank you so much for inviting me today for the conference. I'm just gonna start the clock. All right, so now that Ruth took you over the what and the why of the Timed project, I would actually like to talk a bit about how the project is being navigated in everyday practice. So, as was already said, I work as a labor lawyer and as a specialist in collective bargaining. And it was actually almost to the day 2 years ago that I was approached by Wanda Černohorská, who is the principal investigator, one of the principal investigators on the Timed project, for me to conduct with her a structured interview dealing with the question of how Czech civil service workers are managing these digital transformations. Just a bit about us. Our trade union represents roughly 17,000 members. The section of the population that it represents is highly feminized, and our members range between 45 and 50 years. with a very modest average monthly income. So this just is there to give you an idea of who is meant to tussle with these new digital tools, who's meant to work with them, adapt to them. So I want to give you an idea of how digitalization is actually affecting our worker base. So just like 2 years ago, today also in the Czech Republic, we are facing many challenges when it comes to digitalizing our sector. And the effect that digital infrastructure development has on our member base is significant and I'm afraid in a lot of cases also quite adverse. For example, our labor office workers who, just to give you an idea, they're basically the equivalent of staff that you have in, for example, the UK in job centers. So sort of advisors, work coaches. They are actually having to work around a severe understaffing of operations and also a near 2-year-long pay freeze due to a very imperfect digitalization of the process of administering universal credit in our country, which has been digitalized at the client end, but in such a way that I would say is not really an efficiency booster, but actually produces more work, but just offloads it into different departments of the institution. But it actually doesn't really save time, doesn't really save work. But it is being used. It is being used as an explanation for why we can actually lay people off, of why we can do restructuring, things like this. Also, the workers in our internal revenue collection service and our social security offices are telling us that they are dealing with a very minimal amount of training to deal with new system updates that they have to work in. This is something that they are struggling with, and it leaves them feeling that they have no way of affecting work processes or their working conditions. And I'm also being told that even on the part of employers, there is now being a move made to incorporate algorithmic decision-making into HR processes, so into hiring, workforce planning, and this is even so for the public sector, which is quite significant. And I'm being told that this year, over the summer, apparently HR personnel in municipality offices and in ministries are being trained on this. So I'm guessing these algorithmic decision-making processes are going to come into force, over the next couple of years. Just very shortly, what as a trade union, what we're trying to do to lessen the negative impacts of digitalization. One big win that I can tell you about is that we've managed to negotiate some involvement, information, and consultation clauses on the issue of implementing new digital solutions in the new higher level collective bargaining agreement that we concluded last December. This is a collective bargaining agreement which applies to all civil service and also some other workers, for example, like even firefighters, who I don't know if they're dealing with too much digitalization, but nonetheless, it is there. And a great source of inspiration for this for us was the Public Services International Digital Bargaining Hub, which gives you examples of clauses you can put in your contract. It doesn't guarantee enforcement, but it's great. It's a great tool to have. And we also do member trainings on the use of AI and other new digital tools for our members to aid in their work as workplace committee representatives. And also, lastly, we have positioned ourselves, I think, quite successfully as a key stakeholder and a critical watchdog of monitoring the implementation of digitalization. For example, you can see there one of our vice chairs is grilling the then Minister of Regional Development on how they've basically fumbled the digitalization of the building permit process. And what resulted from there was that the digitization process had to be redesigned completely, and also actually the minister resigned after this. So our efforts there were, I think, quite significant. Yeah, that's it from me. I will be happy to talk about the potential benefits of working with researchers in the question time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was fantastic. And then the last formal presentation that we'll have is, before we turn to discussion, is from Frank. So Dr. Frank Siebern-Thomas is head of unit of Fair, Green and Digital Transitions Research in the European Commission's Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. The unit's in charge of policy development and analysis related to the employment and social dimensions of green and digital transitions and links with Horizon Europe. Frank has worked in different departments of the European Commission, including economic policy coordination, industrial policy, social dialogue, sustainable development, and international relations, as well as working outside of the Commission. He holds a diploma in applied mathematics and economics and a PhD in economics. So thank you so much, Frank, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and not much which qualifies me to speak about digitalization necessarily, but I'm in this unit. We're dealing with the fairness of the digital transition aspects, and we're also in charge of programming parts of the Horizon Europe program, in particular as co-chair of Cluster 2, culture, which you all know, culture, creativity, inclusive societies, which also looks at socioeconomic transformations. So I understand my role here will be short. I have just one slide and talk you through that slide. And my colleague Mina earlier today, and also a colleague from research executive agencies here, Mina said more generally stakeholder engagement, citizen engagement in research and innovation activities. So I will focus a bit more on our policy side and the employment social policy sphere. This said, such types of projects are very interesting for us. We also have regular meetings with the member states in the so-called programming committee configuration in Brussels with the member states and associated countries. And we regularly invite 2 projects for these sessions to also have feedback in these sessions, make them lively, and have open discussions also for ongoing research work, not just on programming. So these are excellent examples to do that. I'm not best placed to say how they could fit directly to policymaking, but obviously they do to some extent. There has been was a directive in place. The Commission established a directive on the platform economy. The main issue there was how to define employment relation in this context, where you may be self-employed but may feel managed or be managed by a platform, which is not under your control. So this is one important area, and there's more work going on. Negotiations are ongoing on the potential follow-up directive on the right to disconnect. So it's not the right to access to free time, it's implicit, but the right to just shut off and not work for some time. This is ongoing, and it's the outcome currently unclear. And more generally, obviously, there's a lot of work on the field of working time. So in particular, social partners, trade unions, and employer organizations in Brussels are organized in so-called sectoral social dialogue committees, and they may, in this context, negotiate themselves appropriate working time regulations for their sectors, and probably also take up new challenges. So social partners at European level do also conduct a joint analysis to at least to come to a joint understanding first what the challenges are. And then in the second step, see is there at European level something we want to negotiate together or carry forward together in this context. And there are probably some few, and this is done under a new pact for strengthening social dialogue at European level. Maybe one last example would be in the field of occupational health and safety, where you have directives and protection measures, for example, for using screen devices at work. So this goes together in terms of digitalization. This said, maybe from our policy perspective, we are, the Commission in general, but the General Employment Social Affairs, people-centered. Our policies are to support people, to strengthen a social model and social Europe. So obviously a lot of the issues you mentioned, including on well-being, mental health threats and others, are part of what we are, what we look out for, whether there's need to work. There are rules in place how to regulate. We call them better regulation guidelines. They basically prescribe evidence-based policy making based also on impact assessments and public consultation of stakeholders. So something studies like yours obviously have done that and bring this type of evidence. Mina said before that every action in the European Commission starts with what we call a call of evidence. That's something all services draft together, and this call of evidence describes the problem, argues why things should be addressed at European level, but also already has a first loose assessment of what could be social economic impacts, what is the available evidence base, including from research, and then is published. So the call for evidence is a public document to say, do we know everything we should know at the start of this potential initiative? And obviously the work you do on research should be reflected there, should be taken up, or should even inspire work. One particular important and we do, for example, surveys also ourselves. We didn't discuss a lot today, but the Commission does regular Eurobarometer surveys on what are policy priorities of Europeans. Or we had one Eurobarometer survey on fairness perceptions in the green transition. We wanted to understand what do people are they behind this transition? What are their fears and their hopes in the transition? How do they want to be engaged? For example, and there are many other topics, obviously. One particular category fitting to the last speaker as well is the role of social partners, who have a strong role provided for in the European Treaty, in particular the autonomy, and in the field of employment social affairs, there's an obligation to consult social partners, and only social partners first, in 2 rounds, on the need for an opportunity for a social policy initiative and on its potential content. They can disagree or agree in those rounds. They can give input into the Commission work, or they can tell the Commission, stop, we prefer to negotiate this ourselves, in which case the Commission stops all initiative and gives social partners 9 months to come up with and supports them also, if needed, to come up with a negotiated agreement. If they do so, this agreement can be translated into EU law. There's a quite powerful role they have here. For example, a lot of discussions like your topics on what are new risks in the green transition, in the digital transition are key and are probably drivers of future actions. The Commission is currently consulting on what's called a second action plan of the European Pillar of Social Rights. The European Pillar of Social Rights are compass for all types of principles at European level to be defended, social rights, including, for example, reconciliation of working life and family lives. We discussed, which is also related to this. And again, research input is important also. This is currently a completely open consultation for this mandate's activities. What should be activities? Where's need for action? So to all of you, feel free to come in there as well. I didn't refer to Article 152 specifically, but this recognizes and promotes the role of social partners in the EU and in the member states at all levels, while accounting for the diversity of national systems, and we facilitate dialogue between the social partners respecting their autonomy. Having said this, maybe a bit more concretely, what do we on the European, in the field of research and innovation, once we know of your projects, to promote feedback to those and to put them back into policy making? We have a role to play in programming in the beginning, drafting topics, drafting calls, which then are being implemented by our colleagues in the research executive agencies and others. And we like to engage with the research consortia once the work starts, even including interim results like these. They're most important for us. So we all subsume all of this under feedback to policy. So we are interested in regular exchange with all the group we call SSH stakeholders, academia, policymakers, civil society, social partners, and others. We organize regular events, feedback to policy events or conferences. For example, we had recently a Research for Just Transitions workshop in Brussels, looking also at the link between sustainable competitiveness and just transition, job quality and just transition, and also the fairness dimension. We look at the ethical dimension of these transition processes, and we have upcoming seminars on social protection and inequalities. We want to hear from ongoing projects. What's the state of play in view of a future anti-poverty strategy, for example? One on global supply chain disruptions and one on education and skills, but I probably don't go into the detail because I don't want to miss one new tool. We have set up the Just Europe podcast. You see the logo on the right side. You can also link. We have started producing podcasts, and the main purpose is to bring together researchers and research findings with research users and discuss the actual impact on the ground, which may be of relevance. And we have published 3, a 4th one is in the making. The topics so far were the first was on left behindedness, a fact or a feeling, question mark, what is it and how to address it politically. The second was about gamification and innovative approaches to reskill and upskill people. So a lot with digitalization, with the interesting finding that games, by playing games, even shooter games, frightening games, which were presented at the conference, people can skill themselves for the future needs of the workforce. Neurological, I'm not an expert, but issues included. The third one was on sustainable lifestyles, and the current one, the next one will be on migration, also topic economic costs and benefits of migration. I stop here just to say that we are, when it comes to implementation, probably not also a bit hypocritical in the sense that we don't only look at the number of clicks, but also the time that people spend actually on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. I'm now going to turn it over to Max. So thank you so much, Max.
Maybe I'll just stay here. Hope it works properly. So we'll start in a second the discussion part. Again, I want to reiterate that there's this QR code waiting for you, and I thought about the most effective way of encouraging you to send questions. So I can promise you that I'll ask all the wrong questions to make your life a bit easier, so you can provide us with. But we have 30 minutes, so hopefully there'll be really enough space to discuss the topics we've planned and also some of the issues you provide. The projects you've presented are that fascinating that I expect that some questions would be related directly to the research goals and their content. But in that discussion, I'd like to focus a little bit on a broader perspective. The projects you've presented are demanding and quite complex, and with that complexity has its consequences. So they're fascinating and challenging at the same time, just like our future, I guess. So first, maybe let's start with the overview of this broad problem. How can we deal effectively with that complexity of dealing with many stakeholders, but also projects that cross borders and disciplines, how to organize them effectively, and also how to navigate that space so that we can maximize the gains and benefits. I presume that it's not that simple. I know whoever wishes to start.
I'm happy to start, if that's okay. I mean, there's quite a lot of different kinds of complexity, so it's probably, there isn't one straightforward answer. One of the things in our project, and I know that that's also similar in Ruth's project, is that we were very, very keen because chance gives us an opportunity where we have research teams, well-resourced research teams in multiple countries. And so we really wanted to maximize the opportunity for doing genuine comparative research, which is often quite difficult because there are not many funding opportunities that give you the opportunity to work with like other research teams based in other countries. And so we specifically designed a methodology where for every single work package that we looked at, and I'm aware I didn't set out the methodology for time, but for every different work package that we looked at, we devised a comparative framework collectively as a project team. We're a team of 14, and we used that framework to inform the data collection and the data analysis so that we knew that everything that we were collecting and analyzing was comparative. And then we did that data analysis together because we found that context is everything. And so you can look at the data even gathered through that comparative framework and think, I'm seeing the same thing. You talk about it, you're seeing something quite different. And so this was a very time-consuming way of working. It's much easier when you work on projects where the UK team does this bit and the Polish team does this bit. We met every 2 weeks as a whole team for 2 years. But this has really, really generated the ability for us to do some really genuine comparison. But it also, because we understand so much more about the context, it makes the writing up so much harder, because trying to say interesting things in 9,000 words while holding on to the context is really challenging, and that's been extremely difficult. I could say some other things about specifically the working with stakeholders bit, but maybe we should stick with this theme and then do that
we'll
separately.
move on to discuss that. So, Ruth, and we hear during all the panels, I've heard at least 20 times today, the phrase, I couldn't agree more. I'm just dreaming about someone starting with, I
I'm
couldn't
just gonna
disagree
say,
more.
I completely disagree. No, I don't. So, like you said, we took the approach of collecting exactly the same data in exactly the same time in all of our countries. And that really helped us, I think, to coalesce as a team. It helped us to understand in our case, the overwhelming similarity of experience across different countries. And I think that in some ways is quite interesting. We, as researchers are often tempted to sort of exoticize different groups of people and try and find differences that don't necessarily exist. And don't get me wrong, there were some minor differences between different groups, different genders, but overwhelmingly our data roughly showed that people were experiencing broadly the same things and feeling broadly the same, particularly in terms of the way they feel about their digital technology. So I think that in itself was very generative. I think what has been difficult about the projects is the extent to which the differing countries have similar structural goals within higher education and research. So, as you will attest, the UK is very impact driven. We are all about trying to get as much impact out of our research as we can. And this is, through the project, it's become evident that this is less important in some other countries. In the same way in the UK, we can basically publish wherever we want. This is not the case in some of our countries. So particularly in Poland, there are lists of where you're supposed to publish. So we've had to really be careful in the project about making sure that we are meeting the needs, particularly of our most precarious and our most junior researchers, by taking strategic decisions on where we publish, by always putting them as first author. And that's been great. It's been really good. But I think that reflecting on the Chance programme as a whole, there probably needs to be a little bit of thought about the differing priorities of each different funding stream.
I guess that we'll return to the difficult bits in a second, but I find the keyword impact quite interesting, and that's something that I wanted Anna maybe to reflect on, because I guess that we as scientists, we might define impact a bit differently than trade unions, for example. So
yeah, I think reaching across the aisle is really productive for both parties, for the research community and for organizations like trade unions. I would say that for the research community, we provide direct access to on-the-ground experiences and perspectives that would otherwise be unfortunately missing if you were just to look at official documents, at concept documents, if you were to talk to most policymakers, even though, the experiences of people working in administration, working in these digital systems are the precondition to how we all experience these systems and these networks and how we all experience digitalization. They are missing unless you actually go out of your way to speak to someone who is outside of your purview of where you'd be normally looking. And for us, I think this research is significant in the way that it produces this really valuable data that we can draw on, for example, during negotiations with the government, with employers in central public administration, and it also can shape our, and it does shape our campaigns and our order of priorities. So it's extremely valuable for us as well.
Thank you. So before we move on to discuss the next topic, I'm tempted to ask Frank about his perspective, because Catherine mentioned how difficult it might be for public broadcasters to adjust their practices, and they somehow, in the world of agile business practices, certain institutions have more difficulties than others, and certainly universities and, let's be honest, funding institutions are probably, due to various reasons, are facing that problem as well. So in your opinion, what we could do to facilitate that kind of processes that are more reactive and in this rapidly changing landscape?
It's a difficult question, but I do believe that hopefully what I present later, the answer is to provide let's say a longer-term framework which upholds certain priorities, whether they are public service media or others. I can't say, it's not really the area in which I'm working. But yes, I think research, public services and others need this kind of framework. We need them. We need them for good reason, and we need them for social resilience, which we'll discuss later, I guess. Sorry? Okay, I tried to say we need a longer-term framework for research or for public services. For public media, I can't answer the right question, what are the right media or the right outlets here? But I understood the question as the pressure coming from the fast-changing technologies, or let's say also ownership structures in this field, etc. And I think we need to accompany it with some secured framework for ongoing research and ongoing activities in these areas, which are there for good reason. So this applies to SSH research, and applies to, as far as I'm concerned, to public services, public media as well.
Can I just come in on that?
Yes.
Because I think there's something really interesting about the ongoingness of things. So in my experience, and I've been working and doing research in collaboration with stakeholders for about 15 years, and you put a lot of time and effort into creating relationships, and those relationships are sustained by ongoing relevant research. And there's a real risk with projects like the one that we've done. We've created this fabulous network, not just of researchers, but also of stakeholders. And one of the things that came out of our knowledge exchange workshop in Warsaw was that the public service broadcasters was saying, could you please create an online network where we could meet as a community every month and like share our concerns and hear about the different research that's going on, which we would love to do. It's completely outside of the remit of the project and the funding. And I think there is a risk that you put a lot of time and effort into creating those relationships, and then you don't have the resources to sustain them. And then you lose a lot of the potential that has been created through the investment of money in these kinds of projects. So I think it's a really interesting point about that long-term funding.
I think that there's also an interesting analogy with the Time Project, because that's this paradox of productivity or efficiency terror in our everyday life, and the way in which it permeates also certain academic practices. So actually, being more efficient might be somehow related to having long-term projects funding and yeah,
Most
broader.
definitely. I will always advocate for long-term funding of research projects.
Yeah. On the other hand, I have to say that when I heard about erosion of work-life boundaries or irrational pressure on everyday productivity, I thought that in terms of looking at cultural trends, certainly scientists were like early adopters. I would say. But okay, I guess that we have some interesting questions from the public. Thank you so much.
There are quite a few. I just wanted to jump in on the point about impact, because there's a question here for Frank, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be answered just by Frank, related to the relationship between research and impact on policy. So the question, or the comment and question, is that there's evidence that despite funding dozens of different types of research projects, for instance, migration research, by the European Commission, there's not much impact of this research, and the recommendations given based on the findings impact specifically on actual migration policies, including the current migration and asylum pact. So can we maybe speak here as a group a little bit more about the reason for this lack of impact and how to go about improving evidence-based policy making in the future, presuming that you agree with the statement that's been made here?
I mean, I don't mind giving my thoughts on this. Obviously, I'm not a migration researcher, but I can talk generally about academics. I think we've got two different problems, one of which is time, obviously. As Catherine has said, building these relationships takes time. Talking to the right people so that you can access the right populations to study takes a phenomenal amount of time, and we work on very, very short funding cycles. So often we just don't have the opportunity to meet with the people that we need to talk to. But I think a second issue for academics is that we also need to look into ourselves and the way that we communicate and the extent to which our communications are accessible and understandable to both the broader public, but also to policymakers. So much of our career trajectory is based on producing academic outputs, speaking in a particular language to a particular audience. And if we want to make change outside of the academic world, we really need to speak in a different way. We need to talk in the way that other people can understand and to stick to the very salient points, not all the caveats that we wish to include in our academic papers. So I think a lack of impact potentially can come from both poor communication on the side of academics and a lack of appropriate funding on the side of funders to give us the time to develop those relationships. Also, impact doesn't come overnight. Like, impact can take a while to come. Just because it's not happened yet does not mean that it will not happen in the coming years.
Yeah.
If I'm tempted to ask in this context, Anna, from your perspective, what would make because there is this dream that policy would be more rationally shaped by scientific, by the outcomes of our work, and the dream is not that often realized. And from your perspective, what would increase the chances of implementing certain policies, or is there anything that we could do differently?
Well, I think that the building of continual long-term relationships with the right people is absolutely crucial here, because I, for my part, can say that even if the executive to whom we pitch our legislative proposals, even as a trade union, even though they are not always really amenable to them, especially the current with the current government that we now have, but with continual push that is backed up by results of scientific research, that is backed up by supporting arguments from other stakeholders, the policies that we push for can actually get affected into law, or at least this is the experience that I have from, it's obviously not on the European level, but it is on the national level. So, yeah.
And I can't speak to the European level, but I can speak to the UK level. So that since, well, for about the past 6-7 years, I've been actively moving into influencing policy. I've made a very specific decision that I wanted that to try and see some of the changes that I thought needed to happen. That's what I needed to do. And so there's a few quite specific things that I did. So taking on policy advisory roles, that taking on that first advisory role, I advised a select committee, just opened up doors because suddenly you become the expert in that, and then it opens up all sorts of doors. And then the other thing that it is, as well as doing the things that I do, like, and I completely agree with Ruth around learning how to communicate your research to policymakers is absolutely crucial. There's a completely different way of writing, and you have to turn things upside down. Start with the headlines, end with the recommendations. Don't say too much about the method. It's not comfortable for academics. I think Anna's point, I would say working with third-party stakeholders. So there are a lot of groups that do policy advocacy, and they often already have the relationships with the policymakers. And so actually working with those groups to provide them with a better evidence base to support their advocacy work, and doing joint, I've done joint responses to requests for evidence and so on with third-party groups and activist groups, and that's been a really, really productive way in. And I would also want to put a plea out to academic publishers, because I think there is a real problem with academic publishers encouraging us to write in a way that is not accessible. But policymakers want peer-reviewed, independent research. So they want the kind of research that we produce, but they cannot understand it in the forms that we produce it. And these policy briefs are great, but these are not peer-reviewed, so they don't have the same status when it comes to policy evidence. So we're caught in a bit of a bind as academics, and I would really put a plea out to all journal editors and reviewers, as academics as reviewers, to really address that.
So that leads us to the reflection that there is this sobering pressure of reality, as represented by various stakeholders, is needed. As a social scientist by training, I have to mention that so many panel discussions throughout the conference ended with that conclusion. So, what shall we do now? Educate. It's so Plato is really happy listening to that in some seventh dimension, that knowledge directly leads to change and moral behavior, etc. But actually, reality doesn't always follow that dream. But I guess that idea of changing the practices leads us to this second topic. So I'm quite curious, because your project, you started them several years ago, and probably these lines of research even earlier. So this, following that years of building collaboration with stakeholders, I'm tempted to ask, okay, what do you wish you had known years ago while planning these projects, by planning this collaboration? What are the lessons learned that could be useful, not only from your own perspective, but also for many other people listening to us?
I wish we'd thought about how much data we'd collect and thought a little bit more about the publication strategy in relation to just this amount of data and the challenge of writing that data up when it is so rich and contextual and looking across so many different countries and different cases. So we're mostly writing about 10 different public service media organisations across 7 different markets. So I really wish that we had thought a little bit more about that. The other thing is that we did build in stakeholder working and impact activities, but nowhere near anything close to what we've actually been asked for. And we don't want to say no when stakeholders reach out to us and say, we really need your research, can you help? But none of that is built into the time in our project, and none of that is built into the funding in our project. So we're just doing that on top. And so I wish we had found a way of building in a little bit more flexibility into our work plan for these kinds of unexpected activities. But I think that also depends on funders being open to you building in some space for unexpected outcomes in the course of a project.
Great. So that sounds a bit like trust-building activities that are somehow accompanying the projects that are necessary. Any other reflections or comments?
I think I would say that if I could look back, or if I could advise particularly early career researchers or even more experienced academics who are moving into a field where they think they might be able to create impact, that you shouldn't doubt the value of the research that you do. I think I have spent a lot of time in my career thinking that no one would care and thinking that no one would be interested in, perhaps that it wouldn't be important. And I think we're tricked into thinking that as academics because of the way in which we interact with one another and the way in which peer review takes place and the way in which we publish. And I think listening to everybody on the panel today, it's clear that there is a market and there is an appetite for this work. And it might not happen overnight for people. You might get knocked back. But if you persevere and you have, a belief that it's okay to fail, it's okay to be told no, but eventually you'll probably be told yes and you will make some change. It requires a degree of tenacity and a degree of self-belief that I certainly didn't have, and I know lots of my ECRs don't have, but it's something that we're trying to foster.
Any other comments?
A short one, if I may. I don't know if this was the case here, but let's say from the policymaker perspective, as I said, we are interested to be informed when new topics, new research work starts, to get into it. We may still remember the topic we drafted, but the world may have changed in between, or let's say that the research consortium may have a different angle to it. And I think then from our perspective, it's useful to try to understand each other at that level, for the policymaker to see what could be in such a project, what could come out, not knowing what priorities will be in the coming few years, and for the researchers to listen and to say, okay, they don't mean to be prescriptive here, they don't mean to change our research planning, but maybe there are points of connection one can find together. And I think on projects where we can identify them, for us it's extremely rewarding and helpful, because otherwise this is information we would never get in the process and which could not inspire us.
I think that's really useful, Frank, and it speaks to Ruth's point as well about dialogue. And I also thought that I couldn't imagine that how my research would be, people would be interested or it would be valuable. And I thought it had to be like only empirical. And I think on the last panel, one of the panelists was talking about the benefit of conceptual research. 100%. One of the things we get asked most, what questions should we be asking? Can you give us some concepts to help us understand how to navigate this? So we hear that all the time. And what really opened the door for me was just dialogue. I went along to some different organizations and I said, can we just have a chat about what are the issues on your agenda? What are the challenges you're facing? What are the problems that you're facing at the moment? And then like 2 or 3 of those were like, that's exactly the same question we're asking. And it might take a while to find the right people or to have that conversation with, but once you do, it's so productive for the research.
I also guess that it takes time to find not only the common ground, but also common language, and that is a time-consuming activity.
I have an anecdote on that. But the first time I ever did this, I went to an organisation that I'd interviewed someone from, and I said, "Oh, are you interested in research?" And they said, "Oh, no, we've got companies that do that," because their understanding of research was audience research, and they didn't have any concept that there was any other kind of research. And then we said, "Well, what questions and challenges are you struggling with?" "Oh, this and this." "Well, we've got some research on that." "Oh, what do you mean?"
A similar experience related to the connotations of the word experiment, which in Polish language sounds like sort of a risky activity. From a business perspective, if you're informing someone that you're planning some experiments, it's basically a high-risk, responsible activity. And from our methodological perspective, of course, causality, beauty, elegance. So the languages differ. As Anna, you're n equaling 1 representing the stakeholder perspective, but I'm really curious, what is, from your perspective, when you think about your involvement in the project, what were the unexpected aspects of it? So, because we all try to plan, and then at least that was my experience with some industry partners, for example, that without it's not just building trust, it's also an unexpected type of activity and involvement for various organizations which are not in academia. So I'd be happy if you shared some of your thoughts.
Right. Well, I think what was really positive to see was like a mutual recognition of value of the work that we do. That was really nice, especially in the Czech context. It did take a bit of explaining from us to, or from me to our trade union management to relay all of the practical reasons for which we need to engage with researchers, but it was really positive for me to see that we are now in the Czech Republic building this network of where we, invite each other to conferences, to roundtables, to sort of share, I guess, our expertise or just experiences from our concrete work. And yeah, I feel like as long as the research community is at all interested in the questions that that are most pertinent to us, like how do workers navigate digitalization? Are they consulted in co-designing these things? What prevents them from being more involved? All of these questions are super important for us in designing our activities, in designing our advocacy, in drafting our collective bargaining agreements, and apparently they are also of interest to you due to these like bigger conceptual sort of framings. Yeah.
So certainly one of the benefits of that kind of collaboration from our perspective is that you can hear that some aspects of your work are really useful. It's not a common experience for us academics. Okay, so as we asked you to provide us with some questions, so now it's time to ask at least some of them.
We have a couple that kind of can be melded, so I've done my best to try to meld them. Like this one is directed towards you, Ruth, but again, I think it's a general enough one in some ways, because the question is about actually implementing some of the findings from your different research. So in this case, with respect to time, they said, could you provide some ideas on how the access to free time could be implemented? Are there examples of such regulations? And is this a matter of regulation or education so that people know they need to take care of their well-being and have time to do nothing? And then there was a related question also for you, Ruth, about where is the boundary between freedom and regulation?
I mean, I'm going to tackle the latter one first because I think it's a super interesting one that we were discussing last week at one of our events, not last week, the week before, at one of our events in Switzerland. I think when we think about the way in which we discuss digital technology and particularly approaches to digital education and digital literacy, they are almost exclusively based on the user being responsible for knowing what they're doing and for implementing what they're told. And, it's your responsibility to make sure your kids aren't doing this. So it's your responsibility to make sure that you change your password or whatever it is. And this is problematic because it doesn't necessarily need to be the individual's responsibility. We can shift this responsibility away to, or shift some of it away to the providers of digital media. And I think that a really good example of the way in which our project tells us that we should do this is through the use of algorithms which are specifically designed to lengthen the amount of time that you spend on digital technology. So you've got sort of three key issues at play here. You've got there could be legislation, much like there is in gambling, to prevent these types of algorithms being used within the EU. There could also be shifts in the way in which technology companies judge the success of a product. So if we took a more ethical stance on what success means, so rather than looking solely at duration, we looked at experience, would we start to get higher quality digital content, which would satiate our needs, which would improve our well-being? These are questions, I don't know the answer. And then the third issue, so we have the algorithm, we have the level of responsibility, and we have digital education. So I think that the balance between regulation and freedom is obviously incredibly difficult. But what the public generally don't seem to understand from our research is that they don't have that much freedom at the moment when it comes to using apps, because they are designed to reduce their ability to stop using them, or they're designed to prolong the extent to which they're using them. So I think the interesting question is about regulation that we can all see and we can appraise and we can consult on, versus control from unknown sources through backdoor processes that we don't have access to. And there is a combination, or there is a spirit level between these two options. But I think that, I mean, my one hope would be that we can start to move away from it being solely the responsibility of the individual to think about their digital safety and their digital media use, and move towards a more platform-based account. I've forgotten what the other question is, so I've got terrible short-term memory.
So as we certainly need more time for discussion, but I'm afraid that we have to postpone that for the coffee break.
You need to remember it anyway.
There is. You will be. Yeah. So I hope that we'll continue that discussion later with those of you who are interested. But right now, I guess it's time to Frank's contribution. So could you please provide us with some more details concerning the...
Yes, thank you very much. I'm trying to go fast. I can't provide much more time now, but maybe a framework for continuing such exchange and discussion and research. So I would like to say a word about the Commission's proposal for setting up a social...
Frank, could you speak more into the mic?
Sorry, for the proposal for setting up a new partnership on social transformation and resilience, which I'm very grateful the Polish National Science Center has agreed to coordinate, and colleagues Barbara and Sabina are here. I see them, and heartfelt thanks to all of you and to Malvina for setting this up. Maybe I would like to thank you again for all the interesting discussions today. We have been following closely the developments of Chance, and some colleagues also attended last year's midterm conference in Bucharest, so it's a pleasure to see the projects now. As Chance is coming to an end in 26, we've also been fortunate to work closely with many of the research funding organizations which are involved in Chance and related networks like HERA and Norface. And it's through this collaboration that we are trying to build this new initiative, one that is expected to be launched on the 2026 Horizon Europe Work Program, and which would carry on into the next framework program, FP10, for the next MFF. Just to say, I think it relates to many things we have discussed these days. And in an earlier session today, I heard somebody say, some moderator, that we're in a deep age of societal transformations. And I was thinking, but those are not happening on their own. So they're driven by mega drivers. And for example, in the green transition context, the IPCC a few years ago had a report saying we have to speed up the transition towards climate neutrality. Otherwise, the only way out would be societal transformation. Societal transformation was shown as the risk we run by not acting fast enough. And we also see here now what could be the dangers of AI, for example, if we don't address those. So against the the background idea behind this proposal is also to avoid a transformation or transition by disaster. We want one by design. And we want to contribute to social resilience. Against this background, we have proposed this new partnership, which will bring together actors across the EU, researchers, national ministries, regional authorities, civil society and beyond, to co-create a long-term research and innovation agenda grounded in the social sciences and humanities. It's not just about studying what's changing, it's about driving practical evidence-based solutions to ensure that our societies remain fair, inclusive, strong and resilient in the face of global changes and unexpected shocks. This partnership would, and I think that's on the next slide. Oops. I'm sorry, I have, I think, gone too far. Would have 4 major impact areas and fund research and innovation in this regard: modernizing social protection and essential services, shaping the future of work in a rapidly evolving labor market, fostering education and skills development for all, and ensuring a just transition to climate neutrality. These are not just research topics, they are core political priorities, as you have been discussing throughout this conference, and they are very much aligned with the principles under the European Pillar of Social Rights. Therefore, as I said, we are thrilled that the National Science Center in Poland, who has been coordinating the Chance Network and has co-organized this session, has also accepted to take on the coordination of this new partnership. This marks the first time that a Central European country is leading a partnership in Horizon Europe. We think that's a very welcome achievement, more than 20 years after enlargement, and it showcases Poland's commitment to advancing research and innovation within the EU. However, this partnership cannot be built on its own. We need strong commitment of other members. And I'm a bit lost in the slides, sorry, but we'll share this with you so that you can reread it as well, because we're now getting, I think, to the lower part of this slide. We need a strong commitment of other members and associated countries to get involved and strengthen social science and humanities research, especially with the uncertainties we face on a geopolitical level. The Commissioner in charge of Research and Innovation has launched a request for financial commitments to national R&I ministers. The strength and effectiveness of this co-funded initiative will depend on them and on their commitments. Therefore, I would like to strongly encourage research funders and public authorities who are interested in this partnership to also seek the involvement of sectoral ministries in labor, social affairs, education, and others, maybe climate action, environment, and others who do relate to the impact areas I just sketched out, to ensure that we have a close collaboration between researchers and policymakers. So as we look ahead to the next phase of Horizon Europe and beyond, this partnership reflects a clear message that social resilience and social transformation are strategic priorities going forward. The partnership will foster collaborative, interdisciplinary, policy-relevant research that helps us navigate the very real tensions and transformations affecting our citizens, economies, and societies. We are deeply convinced that this is about putting people at the heart of our policies and ensuring that no one is left behind in the green transition, in the digital economy, or in the face of crises like COVID or the war in Ukraine. In the slides here, you do have, sorry, these are the impact areas, but I don't go into this. I want to end with this last slide. You have a couple of links. In particular, you have a link to what's called a foresight platform and a survey. We attract your attention to those, and thank you to fill them in because they are still collecting stakeholder inputs into what this partnership should do and what the areas should focus on. And with this, if you would like to get involved, please don't hesitate to reach out also to our colleagues at the National Science Center, whom I thank again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Frank. Thanks so much to all the speakers. And I will pass it over to our host to wrap up.
Well, can you hear me now? Because it's... I'm very sorry, probably it is quite likely that the battery ran flat because it shines red and green. It's never done that. Well, it had its chance, it didn't use it. You had your chance and you used it perfectly well. So let's put our hands together for Maksymilian Bielecki, Frank Siebern-Thomas, Catherine Johnson, Anna Řidká, Ruth Ogden, and of course, Sara Perry herself. Thank you very much. And it is time for tea before the second keynote. But before this happens, this is the moment when some of our volunteers are saying bye-bye to us. Can I invite all the volunteers here for probably a family photo with members of the panel? These are the people thanks to whom we knew where to find food, where to find the speakers. So, the Grey Company, by the way, is there anyone among the volunteers who know who the Grey Company were? Lord of the Rings? No? Yes, please.
So I would like to thank my volunteers a lot. Thank you very much, all of you, and for your work yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and I hope in the future as well. So we are great volunteers, and thank you.
And of course, tea and cakes are for volunteers also. Okay, please be back in about 12 minutes.